This is the second video on the history of Native Americans prior to the arrival of the Europeans starting in 1492. If you watched the first video, you should be able to explain how Native Americans migrated to the Americas. And hopefully you should be forming an answer to the second question of what was life like for Native Americans before contact with the Europeans. In answering this second question, there is a bit of a trap that you should be aware of. It has to do with this term, Native Americans. Well, when you're creating your answer, you want to be sure you don't simply lump all Native Americans together into one single group of people. Hopefully one of the things you got out of the last video is that Native American culture is extremely diverse and complex. For example, Native Americans spoke vastly different languages and built very different houses depending on the regions where they lived. So the very first step in answering this question is to recognize the diversity in the lifestyles of the various Native American tribes. In this video, we are going to pick up on this theme by studying three very different Native American civilizations: the Anasazi, the Mississippians, who are nicknamed the Mound Builders, and the Iroquois. By the end of this video, you should be able to explain how each of these unique groups lived prior to the arrival of the Europeans. The Anasazi were an advanced Native American civilization that lived in the southwestern United States. If we wanted to visit the place the Anasazi called home today, we would head to the Four Corners area of New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona. This civilization lasted from approximately 600 to 1200 CE. Many anthropologists, archaeologists, and historians are drawn to the Anasazi because of the complex cliff dwellings they constructed. Here are some pictures of the cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde in southwest Colorado. Many historians believe the Anasazi were not friendly with neighboring tribes and strategically chose this location because it provided a good defense. The design of the dwellings supports this theory, as there is only one entrance to the whole complex, and this requires climbing a 32-foot ladder. When the Spaniards first explored this area in the 1500s, the Anasazi had completely vanished, leaving Mesa Verde a vacant ghost town. So why did the Anasazi civilization collapse? Well, historians can only theorize about why the Anasazi declined so quickly. A leading theory is that prolonged drought struck the area in the 13th century, and the Anasazi were forced to abandon these cliff dwellings in search of a more stable water supply. Now, the Mississippian Mound Builders, the second civilization we're going to study, is not actually a minor league baseball team, although it seems like a pretty good name for one. They were an advanced civilization that developed along the Mississippi River and spread out along the rivers in the eastern and southern United States. The civilization lasted between approximately 800 to 1500 CE. The Mississippian culture built sprawling cities. The largest and most famous of these cities was Cahokia. Now, Cahokia was built across the Mississippi River from present-day St. Louis. Why would the Mississippians choose this location to build their largest and most complex city? Now, hopefully, one of the things that you notice on this map is that there is a system of rivers that all seem to meet up near this location of Cahokia. These rivers would have allowed the Mississippians to transport goods for trading to tribes all across the Midwest, the East, and the South. At its height, Cahokia contained 25,000 to 30,000 people. Archaeological excavations of pottery and other artifacts indicate that Cahokia was a central hub in this vast network of Native American trade. The Mississippians get their nickname, the Mound Builders, because one of their favorite pastimes was building mounds. Now this seems maybe a little bit boring to us, but to the Cahokians, it was a critical practice in their culture. Cahokia alone contained more than 100 of these mounds. And it is believed the rulers of Cahokia lived atop these giant mounds. Here is a picture of one of these mounds, what's left of one of these mounds, called Monk's Mounds. It's the largest mound that was built at Cahokia. To give you a sense of just how massive this structure is, here is a comparable photograph of the Great Pyramids in Egypt. At its base, Monk's Mound is actually larger than the Great Pyramid. Making these mounds even more impressive was the fact that they were all handmade structures built without the aid of a single draft animal. Archaeologists digging at Cahokia also unearthed a series of posts arranged in a circular pattern. Now, what might these posts have been used for? Here's a hint. Here's a picture of the posts at sunset. Now, here's another hint. Stonehenge in England. So these posts are known as Woodhenge, and essentially they function like a calendar. And Woodhenge would have been used by the Mississippians to track the seasons because they would have been watching where the sun was rising and setting. And they then could have determined when the best time to plant their crops was. The Mississippians may have eventually become bored building pyramid-shaped mounds, and so they started to branch out. Here is a picture of a Mississippian mound in Ohio. It's appropriately named the Serpent Mound because of its snake-like shape. Now here's a video of the mound using 3D LiDAR equipment. Pretty cool. Now here's some more mounds located in Iowa called the Effigy Mounds. And if you were just walking through this forest, you may miss it. But if you were traveling in an airplane 1,000 feet above the air, you might be able to make out a line of birds and a bear. Here's another 3D LiDAR photo showing these mounds. The final Native American civilization we are examining are the Iroquois tribes. The Iroquois were an alliance of 5 tribes located in upstate New York. One of the unique features of the Iroquois tribe was the elevated role of women in society. The Iroquois were a matrilineal society. In other words, the family lineage was traced through the mother and not the father. In Iroquois society, women held roughly equal power to men. Women could own property. They could divorce. They were the ones that got to select tribal leaders and the council and the chief. And they decided whether to declare war or accept peace. The Iroquois' treatment of women as equals would later have a profound impact on the ideas of the early women's rights movement in the 19th century. In 1848, shortly after visiting one of the Iroquois tribes called the Seneca, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Moss would hold the first major women's rights convention at Seneca Falls in New York. And although this video focuses on Native Americans in North America, I wanted to briefly mention 3 powerful and complex civilizations that flourished in Central and South America. These are the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incans. None of the tribes in North America rivaled these civilizations in terms of power, advanced technology, or wealth. However, it was the wealth that these civilizations possessed that initially grabbed the attention of the first European explorers, the Spanish. This left North America to other European powers, such as the Dutch, the French, and the English. Now, before we conclude this video, I wanted to briefly try to explain why I think it's important to study Native American history. Many U.S. history classes exclude this period entirely. But here is a timeline of North American history, starting with a conservative date of 15,000 BCE. This was the date when the first Native Americans are believed to have arrived in North America. These Native Americans were then cut off, isolated from the rest of the planet, with exclusive control of North America for at least the next 16.5 thousand years. It's not until the very end of the timeline, in the last 500 years, that we can add events such as the arrival of Columbus, the Declaration of Independence, and the Civil War. So if we condense all of North American history into the next couple seconds, you can see that the overwhelming majority of time we would find the Native Americans in exclusive control of this land. This leads to the inevitable question, who does this land belong to? Now, there is no simple or single right answer to this question, but it's important to understand the Native Americans' perspective in this debate. We can also begin to understand why some Native Americans may still be resentful about how they have been treated since the arrival of Europeans in 1492. Now, hopefully, after watching these two videos, you can answer in your own words the questions of how Native Americans migrated to the Americas, and what was life like for Native Americans prior to the arrival of Europeans. Thanks for watching.